morning, everyone. We hope that you are doing fine. We are going to begin now. So we need you to close your microphones, and as well, if you are not speaker, your video, so we can have a better connection. I am Margarita Espino Barros. I am Head of Communications and Public Relations for the Tecnológico de Monterrey School of Medicine and Health Sciences. I would like to inform you that you may use the chat for doing your questions. And at the end, we will have a question and answer session. Also, we will send you a link through the chat so you can answer a survey. So we can evaluate the session. On behalf of the Pan American Federation of Associations of Medical Schools, we give you a warmest welcome to our webinar, Best Practices in Medical Education in Canada, USA, and Latin America in times of COVID-19 and consequences in planet world strategies. To start with this webinar, I am going to introduce Dr. Ricardo León Borges. He graduated from medicine and has a master's degree in sciences in physiology. And he also has a master's degree in administration life sciences from Michigan Central University. He graduated from the Harvard Macy program in Leaders in International Education. Dr. Ricardo León Borges is the president of the Pan American Federation of Associations of Medical Schools and a professor for Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara in Mexico. So let us have Dr. Ricardo León Borges to give the introduction for the webinar. Dr. León, please go ahead.
Okay, so once again, thank you for being here with me, and we had some technical problems a few minutes ago, so let's hope that we will be able to make up the time that we lost during this process. So can you please put the first slide? Sí. Bueno, entonces, bienvenidos. So welcome to our Pan American session. For those that don't know what the AFAMC is the Federation of Associations of Medical Schools. It is an organization that gathers all associations of medical schools in the American continent. AFAMC is a nonprofit academic organization founded on November 29, 1962 in Viña del Mar, Chile, and is recognized by the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, since 1965. Its origins are in Colombia and Mexico. We have been making several programs in strategic alliances, and we are a founding and regional member of the World Federation of Medical Education. Next, please. In this map, you can see a general idea of the medical schools that belong to the organization, and around 70% of the medical schools are affiliated to our federation. Next, please. So, as an introduction, I think that the presence of COVID-19 in our countries has given a rise of different reactions and different ways of doing things at the universities and our medical schools. We had work with publications of decision taken, editorials, association agreements with our governments and in our own countries. And if we see the next slide, you will see that it has made us make things differently that most of us have been doing during our medical education life as medical educators, of course. So we have to go to online activities. We have to be using platforms, internet in ways that we never thought we were going to be using. We have to improve our equipments and solve technical problems. We have to retrain and talk to our faculty to do things differently. We have to learn in a different way. And we have to develop new competences that we were not used to have in our regular lives. So if we go to the next slide, we will see that we have been also struggling with the teaching and the assessment. For obviously, this is something totally new for most of us. But let's put it in a good way that it has also given us opportunities for learning directly in the field of action. So we have public health, biostatistics, epidemiology, and all the rest of the topics that are there. But something that is very important for all of us is that, if you put the next slide, the clinical practice has changed. Okay, we have to go to virtual. We have to take our students out of the wards. We have to take activities in risk areas. It has modified all graduation activities. Our processes of admission of students has been changed. And politics has been involved within all of us in this matter. And what is important is that ethics and bioethics is an area that has been struggling with euthanasia for those countries that has filled their hospitals, or the human dignity that we have to give to our patients. And the last slide that I have here is, la siguiente, por favor, is that we don't have to forget the values that are the ones that we had before. They cannot change. And all these values has to be part of the medical education that we provide to all our students. So what we're going to do now, let's go to the last slide of this section. And now what we're going to do is talk about the experiences by countries and the consequences and the planned strategies. And for that purpose, we have Canada, United States, and Latin America. And the planned world strategies will be presented by ECFMG and WFME. So I give the word at this time to Yvonne Fisher, so she can present and introduce all of us, introduce all of us, the speakers of this day.
Thank
Please,
you.
Yvonne.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I hope you are having a great morning. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the speakers for our session, Best Practices in Medical Education. From Canada, we are joined today by Geneviève Moineau, President and CEO of the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada. From the American Association of Medical Colleges, we have with us today John Prescott, Chief Academic Officer and Vice President of PAFAMS. We will also enjoy the presence among us today of Robert A. Kane, President and CEO of the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine, who will be followed by Ricardo Leon, President of PAFAMS. We will then have the opportunity to listen to William Pinsky, President of the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. Also joining us today is David Gordon, President of the World Federation of Medical Education. Our reporter today will be Deborah H. Silva, professor from the University of Puerto Rico. I thank all the speakers for their participation and support. And I shall give now the floor to Geneviève Moineau.
Thank you so much, Yvonne and Ricardo, and it's such an honor to have been invited to this session with so many esteemed colleagues. I hope that you can hear me, yes, and that you are now seeing my slide deck. I'm trying to get to, there we go, the full view, and I will make sure that I can see as well. Fantastic. Buenos dias, bonjour, and hello to everyone online. It is always an honor for me to have the opportunity to speak about what is happening in Canada. And as the President and CEO of the Association of Faculties of Medicine, I have the privilege of supporting a board of directors which is comprised of each and every one of the deans of our faculties across the country. You'll see here that the red dots represent the schools, and you see that the other dots represent how distributed our education is. And so this COVID era has been one that has been obviously very busy for our association, as for all of you. In Canada, we are again very fortunate that we have had a rapid early response to the call from the World Health Organization of a world pandemic. We've had strong leadership from our public health agency in Canada, the federal body that is aligned with our federal government, understanding that direct health concerns are the jurisdiction of our provincial health ministries. But I would say that at this moment in time, our leaders have left politics behind mainly and have really focused on the needs of our population. And so, as well as supporting the health system and enabling us to do what we need to do to ensure we were prepared for this pandemic, we also have received ongoing support from our government to ensure that there's economic stability for the country. What's been most impressive as a new activity in the clinical realm is our very rapid transition to virtual care, where now doctors are able to provide care to patients by phone, by video conference, in any way virtual. And this now is accepted as an appropriate patient-physician interaction that actually is supported by government. In the academic environment, we had a very quick pivot to digital learning, to distance learning, because we had the infrastructure in all of our universities. This is something that we were able to transition to within 1 to 2 weeks. So as soon as it was determined, again, this was all happening in mid-March, that students had to be learning from home, those who would normally be in a classroom or in small group settings, that was a quick transition. We also had a very clear indication that our medical students who were in the clinical environments in our hospitals and in our ambulatory clinics were no longer welcome at that moment. They were deemed non-essential. And so again, here we had to find ways to continue with their education in non-clinical environments. However, for our residents, so those who have an MD, who are still training in family medicine or other specialties, they were clearly identified as essential frontline healthcare workers, and in fact were deployed. So you might have been supposed to do an elective or a rotation in dermatology, but no, you were told as a resident, no, you now have to go work on in the intensive care unit or in the emergency department where the need was felt at that moment in time. And so, of course, teachers, researchers, our graduate students supporting our researchers all had to be working from home, with the exception of those who were working on COVID-19 research. From an advocacy point of view, as our national organization, it was clear that we had to work quickly with all of our partners to ensure that we were enabling those who were most affected by these changes. And so we quickly made sure we were advocating to government to ensure that all of our care providers, including our residents, had appropriate personal protection, and also advocated for them to have what we're calling pandemic pay, as that was being provided to other healthcare providers as well. We also were successful in advocating to Immigration Canada, our federal agency that determines who can come into the country, to ensure that those international graduates who were able to come to Canada would be deemed as an exception to the rule, as they are essential workers. We also worked very closely and quickly with those organizations that are responsible for the national examinations, either related to our final year students needing to start residency, as well as our residents who were doing final exams to enter practice. And we supported those organizations in their decision to postpone exams or to change the format of certain exams, understanding that these could not take place in the usual manner within exam centers, and certainly the clinical examinations were not something that could be done in the near future. We also ensured that despite not writing their exams, that our students could actually start their residency on time. For us, that's July 1st. Despite not having written their exams, that they would be allowed to start residency, understanding that they would write the exams when available. And the same thing, our graduates could start practice with the understanding that this would be they would have a provisional license until they can take their exams. It was also important in our setting to ensure that those students who would be the class of 2021, so having their graduations this month, would be able to undergo their process for matching into residency, which in Canada is normally a process that takes over 9 months. We were able to create a very compressed timeline over 5 months that will allow students to, when they come back to their clinical environments, and we're hoping that that will be no later than July in all of our faculties, that despite having missed up to 4 months of clinical exposure, they'll be able to catch up and be able to undergo their match process so that they can start their residency on July 1st of 2021, so that we will be all caught up. Many partners involved in those kind of decisions. We also have confirmed that all interviews for residency, whether that's application to the first year of residency or matches for later on for subspecialty, will all take place in a virtual environment, and that's our expectation. AFMC is also establishing a virtual clinical medical education task force to ensure that as virtual clinical activities continue, that we ensure that medical students and residents and fellows are engaged, are involved in those virtual visits, as that's an important part of their education, and to ensure that that happens in a safe manner for the patient, for the learner, and that appropriate assessment can take place. AFMC also developed a set of guidelines, particularly for the return to clinical activity for our students, and these are available. The 10 guiding principles are available on our website if you're interested. This just shows you the beginning of it. Again, understanding that this is about safety first, quality of education, maintenance of standards as the highlights. We also, of course, are engaged in the health research environment, and we had an important role in advocacy for funding for trainees and staff, as many research activities have been slowed, but now are hopefully will be resuming shortly, as well as, again, guiding principles for return to safe practices within the research environment, both for the trainees and for the researchers. None of this could happen without extensive collaboration with our partners, and you see many of them identified here. These are the regulators, these are the certification and accreditation bodies, as well as the leadership in research, and we have really understood the importance of this collaboration and of being able to quickly gather and work together towards a common goal. It's very clear that we do have a similar goal all the way through, and that is at the end of the day to have a healthy workforce that can then care for Canadians. So our lessons learned really have been that this national consortium that we are of our 17 faculties of medicine has been invaluable for our 17 faculties because of our strong governance and leadership, and the importance of having pre-established relationships with government and with our partners to ensure that we can respond rapidly and appropriately to challenges such as COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Genevieve, for your very nice presentation. And now After this part, we're going to go and listen to Bob so he can give us his presentation. Is Bob here?
Was it John next or?
No, I think it was Bob Kane. If Bob is not available, let's then ask John Prescott. Please, John. I think it's
sure. Hello, everybody. Bob, I think there were Ricardo's referring to you. Did you want to go next, or do you want me to go?
Okay.
Okay. He said what?
No problem, my friend. So let's go and.
Okay. All right. I'll go ahead and start then. Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is John Prescott, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I'm up on the list here. It's good to see so many colleagues' names, and it's I have fond memories of visiting with you and seeing you. So again, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. I'm going to share my screen in a moment too, and I would like to say that I'll make you a bet that my presentation is a lot like Jenny's, in the sense that a lot of the lessons learned that she's talked about are things that I was going to mention. I'm sure that others will mention too. These are because we've all been learning these things in rapid sequences, and some of the very basic principles that she was talking about really go across the world. There's no doubt about it. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here and get up the presentation. Here we go. All right. All right. Here we go. So, very briefly, and I also want to say thank you very much to our hosts for having this today. Putting this on for so many people is really making an impact across the world. So thank you very much. The AFMC has an essential mission, is to lead and serve academic medicine to improve the health of all. And we do that through a variety of different mechanisms. We have a fairly large staff, and we have 710 employees. We have a leadership team of about 17 of us, who our job is to look out across various fields in medical education, working with schools, in clinical care, research, advocacy, to really see how we can make an impact to improve the health of all folks. We were going along just like all of you were right up until the beginning of this year. We started to notice the things happening in China. We started to do some preparation in the States for things that we thought, but really didn't do too much until, as Jenny had mentioned before, about mid-March. And that's when we started to really change our focus as an association too. We do, as the AFMC has this whole section of meetings and professional development. It's a service provider. It provides things called like the MCAT, an application service, a way for residents to match up to their programs. We publish a lot of articles. Many of you subscribe or get articles from Academic Medicine. And we handle lots and lots of data. And it's our goal to take that data, put it into some form to make it information that's useful to you and to others, so that you can actually make informed decisions. And we like to think that we have an influential voice, and we do advocate for improved health.
I'm sorry, John, people can't see your slides.
Okay. All right.
We can do it for you, doctor. We can do it for you, no problem.
All right, please, I'm so sorry. I will get out of that. Let you do that.
We're going to show them. Is that okay with you?
Please do, please, okay. Yes, okay, and that's, go one more. And you can actually move to the next one. Thank you. So when COVID started to hit the United States, we actually had something we have a team that we call the Rapid Response Team. Usually these are for set disaster type situations, hurricanes, some sort of either a physical disaster, something happening to a school or a hospital or whatever. We put our team together, we get ready. We did the same thing as we started to respond to the pandemic. But this was a time in which we actually had a team which always had been working in, well, we get together and work for a week, maybe 2 weeks, but never have we had a team that's been meeting now since the beginning of, actually probably the beginning of March, right through, we have a meeting again today, and we've been meeting almost on a daily basis. Why? Because it helps us to focus our efforts across the institutions. And the reason I even talked about the institutions before is because medical education is never delivered solely in just a school in one particular setting. I mean, yes, it can be in particular spots, but primarily it is something that is done, it involves a collection of individuals, usually a collection of institutions. So our rapid response team started working together. We started sharing information with our teaching hospitals and medical schools, and we were also collecting that information. What are they hearing? What are they seeing? How are they doing? We started to make the changes and work with providing some guidance about medical students and their rotations, about where they could work, why they needed to be pulled off those rotations. And again, it came down to, as a country, we were not well prepared. We were not well prepared with the number of tests that we needed. We were not prepared with adequate PPE. And quite frankly, a lot of our clinicians who were actually the clinical teachers were so busy taking care of patients that we needed to pull the medical students out of that environment. So all those things were very important for us to do. Jenny mentioned before, working with the politicians and others, and we too had to do this. Often providing advice, often providing scientific advice, fact-based advice, so that people could make good decisions and again, help along the way. Students, residents, faculty, all were affected on this. And not only were they affected because we were pulling them out, but many of them got sick. And that's a message I wanted to make sure that I give to all of you, is that your organization needs to be prepared for some of your leaders to actually get sick and be pulled out. And what will you do in that case? We were fortunate because we had a few people here in leadership positions at the AFMC who did get sick, and we were able to backfill and be prepared. Also having, I'll move on from here. Next slide, please. The AFMC has, and so we have, if I can point out to one thing to you, because I know we started a little late, I want to give you back a little time so we have questions and answers. If you can, the most important thing you should grab from my presentation is that link at the bottom, the www.AFMC.org/coronavirus. You will find a wealth of information on this page. Everything and anything to do with the coronavirus, be it in education, clinical, research, working with the feds, working with whoever, it's there, working with our colleagues. And as Jenny had said before, that is another key component, is working with our colleagues was absolutely essential for the success. And one last slide I have, and if you could go to that. Next slide. On this particular slide, you can see that there's a host of different, if you click on that, if you put that website in, this is what you're going to get. You'll see that you'll have a whole bunch of different things were updated just the other day. You will have a section in here on WMC services, meetings, clinical care, education, research, advocacy, news and media, everything you'd like to see. So please use this resource at any time. It's open to anyone in the world, and we'd love you to have more people take advantage of it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. I look forward to the questions, and I apologize for the problems with the slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It was a very nice presentation, and thank you for sharing that important source of information for all of us in this webinar. So now I'm going to go to the presentation of Robert Kane from the Osteopathic Medical Schools.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Now I can see you in the slides.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. We will make that change. I apologize earlier. I was receiving the message that you needed to unmute me and I needed to convey that. So I apologize.
Of course.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with the Federation today about efforts by the osteopathic community to transform medical education in response to the current public health crisis. Importantly, as I begin to speak about the changes among our community per se, I do want to make mention of the fact that there's been outstanding alignment with our colleagues at the AFMC, really representing all of the medical schools in the United States in this particular effort. So I have two focus areas for us over the next few minutes, talking just a little bit about efforts to prepare medical students, both for movement towards graduation and entry into the workforce as medical residents, and then efforts to try to support and protect students, leaders, and the current healthcare workforce during the pandemic. So ACOM represents the U.S. Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine, and a few pieces of information for individuals on the call who may not be aware. There are 37 fully accredited colleges of osteopathic medicine operating in 57 locations in 33 states. For the most part, the curriculum offered by an osteopathic medical school is similar from a standpoint of the biomedical content, clinical content, and health system science content. Where it differs is the integration of an additional 200 to 250 hours of education based upon osteopathic principles and practice, which includes education in the use of manual medicine in the care of our patients. Approximately 25% of students in the United States today are earning the DO degree. About 20% of the medical schools in the United States offer the DO degree, and about 20% of DO degree granting schools are located in rural and underserved parts of the United States. So helping to meet a very important part of the U.S. physician workforce. Prior to COVID-19 becoming a challenge, ACOM was planning to implement a new dual organizational structure based upon the work of John Cotter. And this work was really rapidly advanced in the face of COVID-19. And I'm not surprised listening to the first two presenters, the similarities in terms of the activities that have taken place at ACOM since really mid-March. We've definitely taken an adaptive, problem-based approach to organizing our work. There have been four main areas, and you can see them listed here. Transforming medical education using technology, transforming clinical education, addressing pathways to practice, and looking at the public health and wellness initiatives that would be necessary to support a response to the pandemic. From a standpoint of transforming medical education through the use of technology, we saw a rapid movement of our 37 schools and their additional location campuses to online learning. Now we're trying to move that from simply lectures that are done online to true online learning as we enter into the next academic year. Strong integration of augmented and virtual reality into that content, as well as better integration of simulation. And as noted by the first speaker, the broad introduction now of telehealth and telemedicine into the curriculum and into patient care. As we look at transforming the clinical education experiences, very similar to what we've already heard about the challenges that were faced in our teaching hospitals. And so the need to rethink how we delivered clinical education and how transitions take place from the second year of medical school into the third year and from the fourth year into GME. So the second work group focuses on that. The third work group, the Pathways to Practice, is very focused on the application process. In the absence of the medical college admissions test potentially for a good portion of the early application period this year, as well as the college transcripts and grading process, this certainly had to be rethought very quickly and moved to a new process, as well as now looking at virtual interviews this year for medical school. And finally, we looked at how medical students could be a part of the response to COVID-19. Where do they actually fit into this process? So each of these adaptive work groups were structured around problems to be solved. And in this particular case, we're going to focus on, for just a moment, the public health initiative, which initially began as medical student specific, but grew very quickly into an interprofessional response. So we're actually working with multiple other groups to address the pandemic and a response to it. These were the challenges that we identified, the problems that needed to be solved in relationship to that. The idea that how do we continue medical student education during a time when exposure is limited? How do we describe appropriate roles for the medical students within the healthcare system? How do we address the unmet needs in the various sectors of the healthcare system itself? Number 4, very important. Unfortunately, we were seeing a rather reactive posture, not surprisingly, among both hospital leaders and public officials. And their expectations of what medical students could do in terms of the pandemic response were at times concerning. And so not really reflecting a good understanding of the level of training achieved by most medical students. So we were focused upon making sure we could convey to them what was proper for medical students. And finally, dealing with the problem that there was no organized response to the pandemic in terms of medical students at the system level. And so trying to work at both the state and the federal level to address that. Once the problems were identified, each of these 4 work groups, very committed individuals, lots of extra hours going into the planning work. They identified the questions that needed to be addressed in order to actually start to describe solutions and goals. And so ultimately, that 4th work group was able to organize itself into the concept of Students Assist America, so mobilizing the future healthcare workforce. And the goals that you actually see here on the right side are what we have in fact outlined. So being able to address some of the gaps that I mentioned to ensure that our students have appropriate roles in the response to the pandemic itself, that we are proactively conveying those roles to member organizations, as well as to hospital leaders and public officials, and that we have created strong connections to other healthcare professions. We're currently working with 8 other professional organizations here in the United States in order to magnify the potential response and to identify where, in fact, students can best fit in the response to the pandemic. So from our perspective, there's been a significant strengthening of those interprofessional relationships and hopefully the development of interprofessional teams that will extend well beyond just our acute response to the pandemic itself. Working with those groups and among our member colleges, we've been able to talk about positioning that student workforce. We've tried to place the students into areas of background risk. So essentially no assignments with direct patient care or making sure they're doing remote patient care. Certainly we believe as PPE becomes more readily available and hospital activity begins to resume at more normal levels, we can begin to move inward on this particular diagram to areas potentially of higher risk, the latter areas being most likely by choice, and with students who have demonstrated appropriate competency. Throughout this 2-month period, since really our journey began, we have tried to communicate on a regular basis with our member colleges, with our hospitals, the teaching sites where the students are training, and with our students, and as mentioned with the AFMC. Throughout it, we have tried to make sure that the messaging is that students in their roles should be able to enter into a safe environment, be appropriately supervised, and that any activities they do have are appropriate to roll. And finally, much like we were hearing from John just a moment ago, we have tried to increase the number of connections inside of our organization. And so really thinking about our 57 campuses being interconnected, we have a wonderful listening net to try to identify potential problems that do exist in the community to, as an organization, collaboratively respond to those and to adapt and pivot as necessary in terms of our educational endeavors. And so through a combination of hotspots meetings with our board of deans, which is comprised of all the deans from each of the osteopathic medical schools in the U.S., as well as the clinical educators from across those same schools, we have been able to continue the work, and those two groups help to guide those 4 work groups which I mentioned. Much like John was talking about in terms of the response team, we have had daily huddles among the ACOM senior leadership since mid-March. Now those do appear to be winding down in terms of the frequency and duration as we move to a little bit of a more proactive response in terms of our activities. But in summary, we are trying to adapt to make sure that 25% of the nation's medical students earning the DO degree and being part of the future workforce are able to continue their education. We've been trying to respond in terms of making sure they are ready for graduate medical education, recognizing that they will not likely have the same experiences as their predecessors and that a significant amount of their education will occur through more of a virtual setting. We are trying to make sure our students are prepared to contribute to the pandemic response, especially in the community setting and with recognition of both mental health needs and relationships to other professionals. So in that sense, strengthening that IPE relationship, and then finally trying to strengthen our organization throughout this to become more adaptive and prepared not only for this type of challenge, but others that may actually lie ahead. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share just a little bit about ACOM, and I will look forward to questions at the end.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. It was a very nice presentation. It gives us an idea of what is taking place in the osteopathic medical school world. So now I'm going to make my presentation, and let's see where it is. Okay, so we have here the participants of the event, and then we have the different organizations, as I mentioned, from Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Peru, and Dominican Republic. So what I'm going to do is in the presentation that we had of 1.5 hours, I'm going to make a short review of all the presentations in 10 minutes. That's what I hope. So if we put the next slide, we started with Argentina, la siguiente, Jorge. Okay, sorry for the technical inconvenience. So we had a presence of Argentina, okay, and the big problem is that they have to go to virtual teaching. They're using the Moodle platform to make their class activities and using Zoom and Google Meet as the main references for their projects. All clinical practice was changed to the second semester of the year, and the undergraduate internship years were changed to clinical cases of the 4 basic specialties. And the clinical practice will be during the second semester of the year in double shifts in order to make up the time that was lost during this pandemic. Next slide. They had to buy computers and equipment, and it was necessary. This is from AFACIMERA. This is the Chilean people, and they had to buy computers and equipment and reinforce the broadband for the students. They had training of faculty and students in the use of platforms because they were not used to it. Even that they knew it, they were not used to work with it. All activities of the first 5 semesters were suspended. Undergraduate internship was suspended also, but 3,000 students were volunteers and virtually trained by the Ministry of Health, but not in contact with COVID-19 patients. Their activities were to take care of at home of chronically ill patients, providing medications, vaccinations in the case of influenza. They were supporting call centers and those kind of things. The next slide, the personal protection equipment was provided by the university and sometimes the hospitals where they were participating at. They had to develop a mental health program for students because of the consequences that this has created for them. And at level of postgraduate studies, the residents stayed at their hospitals, but in this time under the supervision of the Ministry of Health. The flexibilization is in the application of final examinations and in remedial undertaking is needed of the practical activities in different sites. In the next slide, we find the University of Costa Rica, okay? And they said that it was very difficult to change from presential to virtual. They have been using the Zoom platform and much concerned with assessment of their courses. The students out of the hospitals by decision of the Ministry of Health, producing tension among students. Most elective surgeries were suspended since hospitals at Costa Rica were transformed to attend COVID-19 patients and residents are not participating at this point. Next slide, please. Ecuador, AFEME, with 424 medical schools, they need to act with serenity and have solidarity among students and faculty. They had no experience with virtual teaching and learning. They request to the Ministry of Health not to allow medical students to be in contact with patients with COVID-19, and if it's necessary, to provide all necessary personal protection equipment. Access to several platforms of communication, and not a medical school have access to internet or computers. So since not all had that opportunity, they lent laptops to their students so they can be in contact with them. The next slide, please. They had to negotiate with broadband companies to give access to their schools. Some schools are providing transportation for interns and residents to attend facilities of clinical training, and psychological supports were also given to students and faculty. Next slide, please. In Mexico, that's AFEME with 109 schools. They made a publication with the action plan of medical schools, and it had 4 actions. Protection and security for the education community. This took students out of hospitals, and when they return, have an adequate personal protection equipment. Then had academic continuity with distance learning. Use of platforms for asynchronous and synchronic communications. 3, communication and emotional support for the academic community. And 4, response of social responsibility. Next. They are also working with 8 pillars that were provided by the World Health Organization for phase 3, together with other actions. So they have risk communication and community involvement, infection prevention and control, monitors and case investigation, training and retraining, medical case management, and organization of a webinar entitled Leadership of Medical and Health Education Institutions at time of COVID-19. So where many of the Mexican students and faculty participated in. Next one, please. And they also had another publication, The Role of Medical Students in the Face of Pandemic by COVID-19, a shared responsibility. They have been collaborating with the General Direction of Education and Quality in Health and Ministry of Health, collaboration with the Mexican Association of Physicians in Training, and they were able to create a web page within AFEME that is named Virtual Classroom for COVID-19. This has free resources in Spanish for anyone who's interested in going into it. The next slide, please, Jorge. From University of Panama, the Dean Enrique Mendoza mentioned that he had the same problems that the country before his presentation, that the clinical semester started in January and preclinicals in March. So by the time the suspension of activities of clinical semester, they had 2.5 months of clinical training and preclinical only 1 week. So during the last 6 weeks, all activities of the medical schools are virtual. That means lectures, clinical cases, discussion, assessment, etc. and requested flexibility with the idea to start clinical rotations on July, but with the second scenario that can start in September or October. They believe that by doing this, they can fulfill all the clinical rotations needs. Next slide. Until the clinical activities are renewed, all theoretical actions will be given virtually. And after that, they will have intensive clinical sessions for up to 4 to 6 months. A grant from the Ministry of Science and Technology of Panama was given to develop a project of a virtual hospital to take care of our chronically ill patients. And this consists of a chatbot via WhatsApp that would collect information from patients. If they have the sufficient amount of information or is pertinent, they will send it to the medical student, and the medical student will make the reception of the patient and present it to the faculty. If the faculty considers that it's necessary, then between faculty and student will review and treat the patient. All participants to the webinar and the webinar that we have for Latin America were very enthusiastic about this virtual hospital. And in the near future, we're going to provide a link of the project in the AFACIMERA's webpage. Okay, the next one, please. The virtual hospital tends to give medical care to the poor because there's a very important underserved population in Panama. Public education is suspended because there are no economic resources to provide virtual activities. So as an action of the medical school, they are going to provide a virtual course to 100 selected students to prepare them for the admission test for the health science schools. The undergraduate internship will start on 1st of July with 200 students. And for residents, there will be a national meeting for define the steps to follow. So by this time, they probably have an answer for this next actions. Next slide, please. As PROFAM from Peru, their major concern was the deficit of physicians available in the country. So what they did is they facilitated graduation and the obtention of degrees. And in order to do that, they had a very good relationship with the government, health and education areas, and all other entities to participate in the facilitation of obtaining the doctorate degrees in Peru. The undergraduate students had to go virtual, so they have virtual campus to go over networks of bioethical issues, public health, etc. They develop a video conference about COVID-19 with up to 5,200 participants. 65% were medical students. Exchange of experience to reschedule the academic activities with the main idea to save the semester or year for the medical students. Next. And a level of postgraduate, they plan to a relationship with national organizations for resident studies, follow up of residents that have been infected with COVID-19, support to bring back to the country residents that were abroad, mental health support, and webinar for treatment for residents and specialties for around 2,000 participants in all Peru. Next, Dominican Republic with 11 medical schools. They have a very good communication with the Ministry of Health. At the beginning of the pandemic, they made a webinar between all medical schools to get an agreement on what to do. So they managed two important issues. The first is how to preserve quality standards in virtual medical education. There was a lot of faculty resistance to try to go online and to try to make this a new way of teaching. And the back connectivity of students to the web, there was a big risk. And the other thing was how to answer the needs of the Dominican Republic society. So in this way, together with their universities, they started producing ventilators to support patients at hospitals and the production of personal protection equipment. And they are also providing online assessment to mental health. Next. They're working in a scientific research for COVID-19, and the results will be shared with all associations. Their main concern is that even that they have been given all classes virtually, what % will be approved by the international accreditation agencies? And even if the Dominican Republic Ministry of Health approves 15, 20, or 30% of the rotations being done in a virtual form, what will be approved by CFMG and the World Federation? That was one of the main core questions that they had. Next. So the challenges of this meeting that we had is to review the role of the faculty and the new way of teaching things, review the humanistic activities, including values, the relationship that we have to have between patients and physicians, the medical professionalism that we have to continue to develop, determine valid numbers of weeks of hours of clinical rotations to be valid international. And finally, la siguiente. The conclusions is there has to be a lot of flexibilization among us. We have to be open-minded to make changes, a level of collaboration and support among us, virtual activities and assessment, innovation and creativity, and fulfillment of quality standards. So that's the last slide I have. Just put the next one, please. So thank you very much. Next. Okay, so now after hearing what the academics areas of Canada, United States, and Latin America have been achieving, we provide the word to William Piskey about what ECFMG thinks about all these things taking place now. So please, Bill, it's your turn.
Sure. Thank you, Ricardo. And thank you all for the invitation and the opportunity to be with you here today. Given the time, with about 14 minutes left on the program, I'm going to try to be brief, and I'm going to try to do my presentation as a discussion without slides. And there's probably two words that I think express what we have been doing during the pandemic to help the medical education community and the patients that the community serves. The first word is advocacy, and that applies to advocacy for international medical graduates. And the second word, which really morphs into a phrase, is coalition, and that's the Coalition for Physician Accountability that a handful of us on this symposium participate in, and there may have been a reference or two to that earlier. So from an advocacy perspective, it was very important early in the pandemic, even before the residency match came out in mid-March, for us to begin, not really to begin, but to step up our advocacy about the importance of international medical graduates for our training programs, and while they're in the training programs, access to appropriate health care. So we began very early having discussions with Department of State, the organization that controls the visa process, to try to ensure a smooth, relatively smooth pathway for foreign international medical graduates to obtain visas. Those conversations went very well. We have an excellent relationship with the career people in our Department of State, regardless of what comes out from administration from a policy perspective. As the announcement came that consulates and embassies were going to close for visa processing around the world, we got assurances that the embassies and consulates would be told to facilitate the process for physicians, regardless of what visa classification they were applying to obtain. And that has more or less worked well. There have been some one-off issues that we've addressed. There's been a major challenge in India that, as of yesterday, the State Department said that they were fixing. About half of our foreign national international medical graduates coming for residency come from 3 countries. They come from India, Pakistan, and Jenny, the third country is Canada. That makes up about half of the international medical graduates. So we continue to advocate for them, including, frankly, assisting in information for air travel into the United States. We've had webinars. I think we've had 3 webinars with over 800 individuals per session from training programs at all of our teaching hospitals, so that our commitment continues there. There's about 4,200 foreign international medical graduates that we're expecting to arrive on July 1st. As part of that advocacy, we're not only committed to the international medical graduates, and they're coming for training. And again, the visa that we work with is the J1 visa, which is a cultural exchange visa, not an immigration visa. We're also committed to the public with whom they have contact, and that proper ECFMG certification is important in that realm. Some of you may remember that ECFMG was founded almost 70 years ago as a non-governmental nonprofit organization to certify individuals who've gone to medical school outside of Canada and the United States and wish to come to the United States for further training. And our education and research arm, AFACIMERA, was founded 20 years ago with the goal and the vision to help to improve health worldwide through medical education. The Coalition for Physician Accountability was formed a number of years ago, basically by organizations from what we call the House of Medicine and some others in the United States. John Prescott's organization, AFMC, is a key member of that. Bob Kane's organization, ACOM, likewise, and then many of the other organizations involved in medical education likewise involved. And the coalition recognized early in the pandemic that it was important to take a leadership role and to help assist the medical education institutions in setting the pathway forward for education, safety of education, and how we serve the public. And the various work groups were formed to be able to focus that. Statements have come out in the last week, I believe, in regards to that. It covers things like interviewing, how medical students should be involved in care, et cetera. And that information is online in each of our organizations, as well as going to the coalition website for that. I think it's important that everyone know that ECFMG AFACIMERA is committed to our mission, both as we try to pivot and be flexible in the short term, and likewise as we look at the long-term changes that are out there as well. I'm going to wrap it up there now because I think we're down to about 8 minutes for the session, and I want to leave time for my colleague and senior citizen, David Gordon, to be able to do his presentation. And I look forward to questions. So David, I think it's your stage at this point.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. David, please, I want to hear your answer to Bill.
Thank you. Well, I will, if I may, share my screen.
Yes, you can. You are co-host also, so you.
Okay. Thank you. Bill always pulls my leg about being a senior citizen because he's just 2 or 3 months younger than me. When he said that we could all remember ECFMG being founded 70 years ago, I suspect it's quite likely that he and I are the only people here who could possibly do that, although I would have been quite young at the time. I'm not going to give a long presentation, and I'm going to talk more about things that we should consider for the future rather than practical things just at this very moment. I have only 6 slides. This is the first one of them, and being given—
I cannot see them.
Sorry?
We are not seeing the slides.
Now, someone has gone beyond my first slide, please. Can we go back? Thank you. Let me just pause and gather my thoughts again. Given the title Medical Education in the Times of COVID-19, of course, for many of us that will remember the resonance of another title, and for the English language speakers, the other reference there is to what we call Love in the Time of Cholera by Marquez, and a very important piece of literature to remind us of how things can go on at a time when there is illness everywhere. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm receiving many messages which say that everything is completely different. And these are two that appeared in my inbox in the last 2 days. One, the one that's been alluded to already about the USMLE suspending step 2 clinical for an additional 12 to 18 months. And then a message from the president of the Royal College of Physicians in London saying, it seems unthinkable that for the foreseeable future, we will be able to examine in hospitals, and going on about assessment. Next slide, please. Another literary allusion, my title is a quotation that for things to remain the same, everything must change, and that comes from Il Gattopardo by Lampedusa. And what I think we have to remember at the moment is that the fundamentals of medical education remain unchanged. We have to have a curriculum, we teach, students learn, we have to teach the right standard, students have to learn to the right standard, we have to assess students, we have to look at the improvement of education and assess it, accredit it, and so on and so on. So those things must carry on. So however much, quotes, everything must change, the outcomes must remain the same. In other words, we must be producing doctors of the same quality and of the same set of abilities as we have already always tried to do. Next slide, please. And so I believe that it's important that we don't get into a mindset that education must be always, as on the right-hand side of the slide, with doctors covered in protective equipment and no possible real interaction with the patient. I prefer the image on the left, a very old-fashioned one, but there we have the patient, the professor, and the other staff and students actually talking in the real world. And I think I was very struck when thinking about this important way to think about education, a comment that came on the chat a little while ago from a colleague in Brazil, Dr. Alfonso, pointing out that it's all very well to say we will give education over the internet, but if many poorer students or students in remote areas do not have practical access to the internet, they must continue to learn in the way that we always have done. Next slide, please. Now, I'm concerned that medical students at the moment will start to learn a very different culture from the way that things really should be. And the education of tiny children is not quite the same as the education of medical students, but I've chosen some images to do with the education of small children. On the left, this is from France, and here you have small children who are being encouraged to play in areas marked out on the ground, but how completely countercultural and unnatural that is for small children. Small children need interaction with each other, or otherwise they will fail to develop in the normal way and will fail to develop normal social skills. The other image, I'm not sure that it is very good, again, for the social development of the children we see here to be eating in their classroom behind big plastic screens where they can probably not see anything very much at all, unless they can just look over the top. So as I say at the top, that if we have a circumstance like this for children, like this for medical students, if the teaching and assessment of medical students has to be done in completely countercultural ways, next slide please, let's hope that such countercultural education must be for as short as possible. I don't have a solution how we will evolve things as quickly as I would like, but I think it's very important. And just as I gave examples on the last slide from education of children in countries which have not adapted well to the change. These two slides are from education in Denmark, which is probably the world's leader in getting children back to school in a way that is safe and is positive, but also is not dangerous to them. And you can see that the children in the class on the left look content, and the children in the class on the right talking to the older person are obviously fine. And indeed, the older person is the Prime Minister of Denmark, so you can see what a developed country Denmark is. I don't think the presidents and prime ministers of many of our countries will be quite as effective as she is. So thank you, that's the last slide. But I leave you with the thought that I think it would be better for us to not just look at what we need to do at the moment, but more importantly, think through for the future, how are we going to get out of the circumstance we are at the moment? How can we evolve our teaching, learning, and assessment in such a way that we do not damage the culture in which our students learn? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. It was a very nice presentation. Okay, so now, because we have very few minutes to go, we will have Deborah Silva to make the conclusions, let's say, of this meeting. So please, Debbie, go ahead with your presentation.
Hay que quitarle mute al...
Got it, right.
You got it?
Good afternoon to all. So this will be very quick because most of the associations that encompass medical faculties are doing more or less the same kind of work. Overall, in this pandemic, most have transitioned to virtual care, telemedicine, telehealth, maybe with some exceptions in some Latin American schools and associations due to resources or lack of resources. Transition to distance learning, most cancel students in the clinical areas. And I was struck that one of the Latin American countries, actually also Costa Rica, also canceled residents in the clinical areas. For the rest, residents were part of the front lines, and most associations provided guidelines of best practices, not only for medical education, and those best practices are available for everyone to access them at the AFMC, at the ACOM, and at the Canadian Association also. Licensing is an issue, so we've been working with licensing and the national exams. I was also struck with what Dr. Gordon said. I think everyone, when they received the email from the U.S.A. Step 2 CS, was kind of taken aback, but we are all working with that. So associations are working so that our graduates actually have licensing and can start. And most of us are all working for making sure that virtual learning and clinical learning, it's based on some specific guidelines. Differences include that for Canada, residents are in the front line, and the AAMC is also providing clinical guidelines to physicians. And ACOM is working directly with health organizations so that they understand what the students' role is. In Latin America, what struck me most was that overall, if there was one common theme, was providing mental health support to the medical students and to the residents, and that was very striking. The ECFMG, it's working with advocacy, very important for IMGs, especially for licensing, because the truth is we have been worried that we can get in our residency programs our IMGs. And Dr. Gordon with the World Health Organization was encouraging us to start thinking not only about what we're doing right now and how we're working with this pandemic and the ways we are advocating for our students, our residents, and the healthcare of the population, but also to start thinking of the ways we will make sure that medical education meets the same standards and our patients are cared of the way they should be, and that the education moves towards a culturally accurate one. So that would be the overall summary of what you all.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for your resume. And hopefully, for those who signed up for this webinar, we will send you a little abstract of all these presentations through what Debbie has done for us, was going to do for us, more or less.
I'll write it down. A lot longer.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, well, I think the time is over. We, because of technical issues, we were not able to have the questions and answers. We will try to answer these questions through email to all those who sign in, and hopefully we will have another event shortly to continue to know the advances that we are doing in medical education and these changes that we're living at this time. So for all participants, I want to thank Genevieve, Bob, John, Bill, David, and Debbie, Yvonne, for your great work, and thank you everyone for this wonderful webinar. Thank you very much, and until next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leon.
Mm-hmm.